My golden brother framed me for theft to get me fired, but I exposed him and ruined his career. My name is Michael, I'm 27, and my life feels like an endless rerun of a show called Brian Does It Better Again. From the moment I could walk, Brian was already running. He was the gold standard, the perfect athlete, a whiz in the corporate world, and our parents' pride and joy. Dinners were peppered with reminders. You know, when Brian was your age, he had already made junior partner and started saving kittens from burning buildings. Me? My biggest feats were surviving the relentless comparisons and maintaining my sanity in a world where my older brother was a perpetual highlight reel. My job at the big company was my ticket to proving that I was more than Brian's brother. I wanted to carve out my identity as someone capable, independent, and beyond the shadow of my golden sibling. Days turned into marathons of spreadsheets, conference calls, and nights spent hunched over proposals. I mastered the art of crisis management, handled chaos like a conductor leading an orchestra, and slowly gained the trust of higher-ups. For a while, I believed I was finally on the brink of the recognition I had craved all my life. Then, life did what it does best. It flipped the script. I found myself standing in my boss's office, the air thick with the suffocating weight of impending doom. The tension buzzed in the room, the silence broken only by my heartbeat hammering in my chest. Mr. Banks, the company's living embodiment of tough but fair, sat at his desk, his face unreadable. It reminded me of the time Brian told me poker faces were for champions, and I'd scoffed. Now, I wished I'd learned that trick. "Michael, we have a problem," Mr. Banks finally said, his voice as neutral as an automated phone operator. But his eyes held a chill that spoke volumes. My stomach twisted painfully as I followed his gaze to the giant screen behind him. It displayed my inbox, bursting with emails I hadn't sent, each implicating me in a trail of financial misconduct. Each message blared accusations in bold digital text, with my name stamped on them. I sank into the chair, feeling as if my insides had turned to liquid and seeped through the cracks in the floor. "Sir, this is a mistake. I didn't—" I began, my voice faltering. Mr. Banks lifted his hand, and the gesture silenced me more effectively than a shout. "Enough, Michael. We checked everything. The evidence is clear," he said, his words landing like iron spikes. From the corner of my eye, I noticed my colleagues peering through the glass walls, their expressions a blend of horror and grim fascination. Their gazes clawed at me, each one a silent accusation. This place, which had felt like a second home, had become the stage for my public disgrace. The meeting was merciless and swift. No reprieve, no chance to plead my case or delve into who had really set this trap. By the end of it, my career was over, shredded like old documents fed to an industrial shredder. The company's reputation was battered, and mine was left in ruins. What I thought was the summit of my achievements had turned into a catastrophic, irreversible nosedive. And in that moment, all I could think of was how Brian would handle it better. Driving home felt surreal, as if I'd stepped into an alternate universe where loyalty and effort were illusions, and people were only valued for how much they could produce before being discarded. The streetlights cast fractured shadows across the dashboard, their glow as cold and indifferent as the world that had just chewed me up. My head buzzed with questions that had no answers, each one louder than the last. My heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it might burst through my chest and make a break for it, seeking refuge anywhere but here. But home wasn't the sanctuary I hoped for. As soon as I opened the front door, I was met by two pairs of eyes, staring at me with the sharp chill of a January frost. Dad sat in his usual chair, that worn-out throne he'd occupied for as long as I could remember. The newspaper in his hands barely moved, only the faint rustle signaling he was aware of my entrance. The silence hung heavy, punctuated only by the tick of the old clock on the wall. It was almost as if he'd been anticipating this moment for years, waiting for the chance to deliver his verdict. When he finally spoke, he didn't even spare me a glance. "Well, Michael, I always knew you'd stumble sooner or later. Brian would never do something like this." His voice, soaked in disappointment, was the final nail hammered into my emotional coffin. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Internally, a sarcastic retort flickered like a dying ember. "Thanks, Dad. That's exactly what I needed. But it wasn't just sarcasm that churned inside me. A surge of rage mixed with a newfound determination. This wasn't just a misstep. I had been set up, and I needed to find out who orchestrated this takedown. The next morning, with the first light of dawn streaming through the blinds, I armed myself with caffeine and a determination as sharp as a blade. My room transformed from a place of restless sleep to a makeshift war room. I grabbed my laptop, the only ally I could trust in this twisted reality, and prepared for a deep dive into the digital maze that might hold the truth. If anyone believed I'd just roll over and wallow in defeat, they were sorely mistaken. I was done being the underdog, the overlooked shadow of perfection. Hours passed as I sifted through system logs, traced login histories, and analyzed every tiny anomaly. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but quitting wasn't an option. Then, as the sun began its slow descent, I found it. A trail of digital breadcrumbs. Someone had accessed my profile, but not from my office. The details were subtle, buried in timestamps and obscure IP addresses, but there it was. The pieces were starting to align. A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth, a flicker of triumph that felt foreign after the past days of defeat. "Brian, are these your dirty deeds?" I muttered, feeling the embers of anger reignite into a steady flame. My heart thumped faster, not from anxiety this time, but from something sharper. Resolve. "Let's see how far you're willing to go, brother." The challenge was set. Now it was my move, and I intended to make it count. I sat with my laptop in front of me, staring at the screen as if I could burn a hole through it and pull the truth out. The world around me blurred into a single backdrop, the glow of the screen and my rapid breathing. As I dug deeper, I came across emails I certainly hadn't written. And the best part? They were sent from an office I didn't have access to. Coincidence? Sure, like taking a vacation to Mars. Okay, whoever did this decided to play dirty, I muttered, and then something clicked. I opened the access logs and my eyes locked onto a name that stood out like a ghost from the past. Brian. My heart did a triple flip. Was it really him? My own brother, who seemed born to bask in glory and maintain a spotless record? A moment of hesitation, then a wave of adrenaline. This felt like the movies where everything freezes and you know you've found the key to the big reveal. Only this wasn't a movie, and I wasn't Bruce Willis. I had no solid proof yet, just a gut feeling yelling, "You're on the right track. Keep going." I chuckled, a shiver running down my spine. "Brian, your golden hour is up," I whispered to myself. The day promised to be far more interesting than I'd expected. I stood in front of Brian's door, staring at the heavy wood like it was the gateway to hell. I took a deep breath to muster courage and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. The door swung open, and there he was, with that signature grin wide enough to be insured. "Michael, bro, what brings you here?" His voice, as always, overly friendly. I raised an eyebrow and said, "You know why I'm here, Brian." The smile disappeared faster than coffee in an empty mug. His face hardened. "What are you talking about?" His voice turned dry, and I felt the tension in the room build, as if we were both standing on a cliff's edge. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone set me up at work, and guess what? The logs trace back to you, brother." I delivered the line with a hint of sarcasm, though rage boiled within me. Brian froze for a second, then swallowed nervously. He tried to smirk, but it came out crooked, like a bad sketch in a comedy show. "You're insane, Michael. You're grasping at straws because you messed up." His words were the cliché of a cheap drama, but his eyes gave him away. In his gaze, I saw something new, a flicker of fear. This was the moment of truth. I nodded, smirking slightly like we were playing poker, and I just laid down my ace. "All right, Brian, let's see how long you can keep this up." I turned and headed for the door, but as I passed, I heard him whisper something into the phone, panic in his voice. It wasn't just a call. It was an SOS. That detail stuck with me. I walked out of his house, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would leap out and dance a victory jig. Now I knew I was on the right track. The next day, I met up with Tom, an ex-colleague from IT who was always a bit quirky, but in a good way. He was the kind of guy who could hack a bank's security system while joking about cat memes. I pushed open the door to the small cafe that smelled like cheap coffee and sad donuts, and saw him at a corner table, already juggling his laptop and a latte. "Hey, Michael. Long time no see. You look like someone set your life on fire and you decided to roast marshmallows on it." Tom grinned up at me. I smirked, but without humor. "You have no idea how right you are," I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. I got straight to the point, skipping pleasantries. "I need to recover something from the company's servers, and I'm willing to pay." Tom pretended to think it over, but his eyes lit up like a kid in a toy store. "Oh, I love when former colleagues bring me puzzles. It's like a riddle, only if you mess up, someone gets fired." Half an hour passed with the clatter of keyboard keys and muttered encouragements like, "Come on, baby, don't let me down." Finally, he leaned back with a triumphant grin. "Well, congratulations, you've got the keys to the kingdom," he said, turning the screen toward me. There they were, backups of deleted data. I scrolled through them until I found the message. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut. There, in black and white, was Brian, my golden brother, discussing with an employee a plan to set me up to make room for one of his friends. I exhaled sharply, but my hands trembled like I'd overdosed on caffeine. "Hey, Michael, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tom glanced at me with concern. I met his eyes slowly. "Yeah, Tom, I just saw the ghost of my family's trust. And guess what? It died screaming." I sat at my desk, looking at the pile of printouts and files growing before me like a snowball. Every line of data was a nail in the coffin of Brian's reputation. I knew this was the point of no return. The only thing left was to make the final move. "Brian, your show's over," I whispered, smirking like a villain in the last scene of a movie. I reached out to Jason, a journalist known for his articles on corporate scandals and insider exposés. This guy was a legend in our circles, rumored to have taken down an entire board of directors once because he didn't like their meeting's coffee. In short, the perfect ally. "Yo, Michael, what's so big that you dragged me out for an early meeting?" His voice on the phone dripped with sarcasm, as if I'd invited him to sunrise yoga with green smoothies. We arranged to meet that evening at a cafe, where no one would think to find two guys with fire in their eyes and sweaty palms. The hours dragged like gum stuck to a shoe. I checked the materials 20 times, terrified I'd missed something. When evening came, I grabbed the folder of evidence and headed out. The cafe was bustling, clinking dishes, chattering voices, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. Jason sat at a corner table, looking like he was expecting something interesting. "Jason, tonight you're getting the scoop of the year," I said, dropping the folder on the table as if it were dynamite ready to blow. His eyebrows shot up, and he smirked. "Don't get me excited before I've even looked," he said, flipping open the folder and reading, slowly at first, then faster as his eyes widened with each line. "Wow, your brother's a real star of the dark side, huh?" He looked at me like I'd just told him I'd seen a UFO. I nodded, feeling the flame of confidence ignite inside me. "Yeah, and now the whole family's going to know the truth," I said, my smile sharp with sarcasm. At that moment, I knew. The machine was set in motion, and Brian wouldn't be able to stop it. The evening of the family dinner started with the usual clatter. Plates clinked, laughter flowed from one end of the table to the other, and it all felt like an absurd play. Brian sat there with that trademark look of his. "I'm flawless and untouchable." I stood there, fingers clenched so hard my knuckles were white, feeling the mix of rage and adrenaline. "Hey, everyone," I began, raising my hand to cut through the chatter. Silence fell, shattering the cheerful atmosphere like glass under a hammer. Brian raised an eyebrow but kept eating, as if I were just another boring episode of a drama. "I have something to discuss." My voice came out dry and clipped, like drum beats. "Michael, don't start," Dad muttered, frowning. I ignored him and pressed on. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about how the Golden Boy orchestrated the dirtiest play. I laid out the printed emails and logs on the table, like poker cards where each word was an ace. The room went silent, sharp enough to cut. Brian, do you have something to say? Or should I read these out loud? I looked at him, and for the first time ever, I saw something like fear in his eyes. He shifted in his seat, mumbling something about being framed, but his voice wavered like a counterfeit coin. Then Mom whispered, almost in desperation, "How could you?" Her words hit him harder than I ever could. The scene was complete. The king had fallen, and we all sat in silence, as if each of us had just witnessed the fall of an empire. Brian fell from his pedestal as fast as an acrobat losing balance on the highest tightrope. His flawless reputation, built over years, collapsed after the article came out. The headline, "Golden Boy Exposed as a Fraud," was a punch to the gut for the whole family. My parents read the paper in stunned silence, while social media lit up with comments, gossip, and schadenfreude. Brian became the local celebrity, but in the fall from grace category. "Well, brother, how does it feel to be the star? Just not the shining kind, but the falling kind." I couldn't resist the sarcastic jab as he tried to pretend he didn't care. But his eyes, once full of confidence, were dull, like a battery drained at the worst possible moment. Suddenly, my parents started treating me differently, inviting me for dinners, texting to ask how I was, as if trying to make up for years of underestimating and comparing. Dad even said one day, "We were wrong, Michael. We were blind." Well, thanks, Captain Obvious. A bit late for that wake-up call after a decades-long nap. For me, this was a fresh start. No more being labeled as Brian's brother. A life where I no longer had to prove my worth to people who always saw me as a shadow, not a person. I realized true value isn't measured by admiring glances, but by your actions and your willingness to fight for yourself. And you know what? I finally felt free. Free to be myself, without looking back at endless expectations and comparisons. My name was no longer synonymous with being second best. It was a symbol of someone who won the game where the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine.